let's begin. All right, everyone, Laura will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance as we get started. So,
Pledge of allegiance to the flag
To the flag
of the United
of the
States of
United States of
America, to the
to the
republic
republic
for which it stands, one nation,
nation,
under God,
God,
indivisible, with
indivisible,
liberty, justice for all.
thank you, Laura, and welcome everyone to the March 18th, 2021 Philipstown Planning Board meeting via Zoom for the 12th month. I guess we didn't meet. I don't remember if we met in March and April. I don't think we did, or maybe we met in April, but not March. So we've been at this for a while, and I appreciate all my fellow board members and their attention to detail and their flexibility, especially Kelly McIntyre, who, while as the outgoing secretary of the board, went through a lot of work and heck to make this all work via Zoom. And I think we're doing a pretty good job, gang. I think we're doing a pretty good job balancing transparency and distance. So well done on that. A couple of opening remarks. Actually, let's do the roll call first, Cheryl.
Okay, Kim Connor,
Here.
Dennis Gagnon, Peter Lewis,
Yep.
Laura O'Connell,
Here.
Neil Toman,
Here.
Heidi Wendell, here, and Neil Zuckerman.
Here. Thank you, Cheryl. So let me just start with a couple of quick remarks, and I think these are important reminders given the volume of work we have. One, I just want to state it's put in the local papers last week that our town supervisor Richard Shea, after a long and illustrious career leading this town and this board in many ways for quite some time, is going to be stepping down at the end of this term. He appointed every one of you. And through his town board role, helped confirm us all. And so I think we will owe him a debt of gratitude for what he's done. In particular, he shepherded the new zoning, not so new anymore, amazingly enough. I think it's been over a decade now since it's been in place, but that was an enormous, for those who've been in town long enough to know, the Herculean task of revising the zoning. So Richard, if you're out there somewhere in the ether, we thank you for your service. We'll have many, many more months to laud you for what you've done, and anything that goes wrong, you can blame us for. But as a reminder, we are all volunteers. I just paid my taxes, or at least did my taxes last week. I was paid $2,150 by the town last year, as most of you who take that check. So that works out to be about $8 an hour, which is legal in most states to be paid that little. So I want to thank you all as individuals. You are all volunteers. You are all committing an enormous amount of time. Very few of us have professional skills in land use, but you all dedicate time and effort and energy. And I want to thank you for that, because if it was just the expertise, we would just have Ron do it all for us and Steve. But we're here because we're members of this town. We represent the town and we represent the needs of this town. I want to remind us always of that role. So with those remarks, I just want to get into the agenda. Can we have an approval? I will do it separately. Let's first have an approval of the January 2021 minutes that have been submitted by Cheryl. Can I have a motion to approve those minutes? Thank you, Kim. Peter seconds. Any edits, deletions? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, thank you. And then similarly, a motion for the February minutes. May I have a motion to approve the February minutes, please?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Kim. Peter second. Any discussion?
I just want to say I did go through them and I made a few corrections, which were just mostly typos, which I sent to Cheryl rather than lead you all through that.
Well, semicolon Connor, we thank you very much for that role you play. It's a good one and an important one. Without grammar, what would we be? So thank you for that. So any other comments on the minutes? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, correspondence. I'll just highlight only one piece because there's a series of letters we've received, several, I can't remember the exact number, but several that are tied to the Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival, which we will not cover tonight, but we have certainly received them. We've all read them, and they are part of our thinking process. So we thank the public for those. We've also received a letter related to the Cone property from Max Garfinkel. We'll cover that later. The one piece that is not on the agenda is a piece of correspondence side of Riverview Industries that that Max has submitted that describes that the Conservation Board is satisfied with the changes made to the site plan pending the inclusion of a maintenance agreement for this oil separator. So I don't know, Ron or Steve or Cheryl, when Riverview is coming back to us. Are we awaiting their return?
Yes, we were expecting to see revised plans to address all Conservation Board comments. From what you've just described, it appears that they've made a submittal to the Conservation Board, yet it has to be submitted to you for your formal review and action.
So can you maybe I don't know if it's better for you or for Steve to put the note to reach out to Max to have him then submit those. It seems like maybe it's caught somewhere.
I will accomplish that after tonight's meeting.
Thank you, sir. Okay. So that's the end of the correspondence piece. So let's get into this meeting. I assume we have our friends from Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival in their seconds. Here's how we're going to run the conversation tonight. Tonight's process, we're going to start with process of where we are, both for the board's benefit and the public's benefit to understand. I know there are a lot of questions at the site visit around process. Secondly, we're going to talk briefly about, or not briefly, we're going to talk about the notion of using a firm to help advise the board on this large project in keeping with what we did with the last very large project. And then we'll get into, for the applicant, Dan or Davis. I assume Dan will drive the conversation. Maybe it will be Glenn. We're gonna go through this document. As I said to you last time, we're gonna go through this in sequence and just get through as much as we can tonight. We're gonna dedicate the bulk of tonight's meeting to your application. We're gonna do 90 minutes and try and get as far as we can in 90 minutes. Obviously, we have other business that we have to attend to, so we can't be a committee of the whole every week for Shakespeare, but we will do our best to attend to it given the magnitude of the project. So is that clear to everyone what we're going to do?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's just start with process and where we are. I'd like to just ask Steve and Ron and then Steve in turn to just talk about where we are in our process related to Shakespeare.
Actually, I think it should be me and then Ron, if that's okay.
Well, I treat you two as the two pillars of wisdom. You're like the lions in front of the public
Tweedledum and
library.
Tweedledee, yes.
Well, you pick your example. I think that's not how I would put you two. Thank God, I can say this. Thank God you have not moved from your roles in the decade I have been on this board. I don't know what we do without you. So over to you, Steve.
Okay. There are essentially 4 applications involved in this project. First is a zoning amendment to allow the change in the proposed uses. The second is a 4-lot subdivision. Third is site plan approval. And lastly, there is a special use permit for the scenic protection overlay and the ridge protection overlay district. The last 3 of those approvals are before this board. The zoning change is, of course, before the town board. But before any of those applications can be acted on, certainly, and I would go so far as to say substantively processed, although there will be some of that as we move forward, SEQR review has to be completed. This board has established itself as lead agency in SEQR review. And so what you're going to be doing is both processing the application and conducting SEQR review in tandem, moving forward with both. Now, it's hoped that all the potential adverse environmental impacts that are identified can be determined to either be non-existent or mitigated to the maximum extent practicable based on a submission of the EAF parts 1 and 3, and part 2 will help you make that actual determination. That's the board's document in which you make your determination. But if for whatever reason it can't be, then as Ron is going to tell you in a minute when he walks through the SEQR process, you'll be adopting a positive declaration and going through an EIS. And again, I'll leave that to Ron. But whatever way it comes out, whether it's a negative declaration or an EIS and a positive declaration, at some point you're going to be done with your SEQR review. And again, as you process both the application and the SEQR process, one process will inform the other. Things that you need to do, they need to do. in regard to mitigation of adverse environmental impacts may affect the site plan. Things that they want to do on the site plan may drive how your secret review turns out. But one way or another, you're going to be done with that. And when you are done with that, you can still, to some extent, continue processing the site plan, subdivision, et cetera. But it really doesn't make sense to get into it any more deeply until they go to the town board and that zoning change, local law, because it's got to be adopted by a local law, is considered and acted on. Because if that doesn't go through, or if it goes through in some other form than is envisioned, it's going to change what it is the planning board is able to approve. So you complete SECRA, they go to the town board for the zoning change. Then once that's complete, they come back for the 4-lot subdivision, the site plan, and the special use permit. So that's an overall picture of how this process is going to go. And I'll leave the more detailed discussion of SECRA to Mr. Gaynor.
So Ron, before you go on, let me ask any board members if you have questions of Steve on that layout of the process. Go ahead, Laura.
So Steve, quick question. You know, I've done this before, so I understand that if you get a neg deck, it's a faster process than if you get a positive, just due to the amount of information that you actually have to provide. So my question is this, and maybe I'm out of jurisdiction on asking this. I'm assuming the applicant knows the process and the timeline based upon projections. So I'm assuming, could they potentially put together a timeline to get us to understand, you know, all of the, you know, the steps in order for us to get there? Isn't that
You
like
mean
part
from
of like what they
start-
can do? Yeah,
Start to finish on the process through an approved
Yeah.
application?
yeah,
They could, but it would be pretty much a guess as far as that goes. A lot's going to depend on how quickly this board acts in making its SECRA determination.
Okay.
The SECRA regs suggest very strongly that you make your SECRA determination as soon as possible in the process. So if you start going through the environmental impacts and in the dialogue with the applicant, it appears that they are not going to be able to resolve the environmental impacts with or issues with a completed Part 3 EAF, you're really better off issuing your POS deck right out of the box. I know this board's practice has been to not make a SECRA determination until after the public hearing, but on a large application like this, and I mean, and really there's at least some case law that says you're supposed to do it before the public hearing. You're best off, you know, having the exact type of dialogue you're talking about tonight, really getting into the issues with the applicant and determining which way you're going to go as soon as possible. And that's going to drive the timeline. And then after that, who knows how long it'll be before the town board. I don't anticipate terribly long, but it's a local law. Who can say, you know? So you could ask them to put something together for you, but it's just going to be, you know, a rough sketch.
okay, thanks.
Other questions for Ron? For Steve, excuse me. Okay, over to you, Ron.
Okay, thank you very much. I've been attempting to review with the board exactly the overall process involved in the environmental review that Steve has just outlined. If we recall, the application came in December for your first discussion with the applicant. When they first appeared, you identified the project as a type 1 action pursuant to SECRA, and that mandated coordinated environmental review with all other outside agencies. The environmental review, or the coordinated review, was initiated at the beginning of January. Outside agencies were given 30 days to issue comment or objection to the planning board becoming lead agency. Since none were received, at this point, you now can formally acknowledge yourself to be lead agencies. In terms of what the overall process for SECRA is, obviously the board's been through it before. It starts with the review of the environmental assessment form part 1. That's the applicant's document, identifies basic baseline information on the action and its environmental setting. As I said, that EAF has been in your possession for some time. What your obligation is to review that document for completeness and accuracy. So you're responsible to carefully check that information and then determine if there's any information that needs to be clarified by the applicant before you move forward. The second step in the process is to prepare a Part 2 document, Part 2 EAF, And that clearly is the board's document. And that's it's just intended to identify any major categories of impacts. And it would identify as well the potential magnitude of those projects. When that form is filled out, you then identify matters that may warrant a Part 3 elaboration, which for an example would be a traffic study, which you do not have in your possession at present. But there's logically other things as well. But anything that is marked in the Part 2 document as potentially moderate or potentially large impact, you do warrant or require additional information for you to gather the information necessary in order to make a determination of significance. So after the review of the Part 2 and the board adoption of it, you typically identify for the applicant matters which require additional information. The applicant then will do or make his best effort to identify mitigation that's appropriate for any of the moderate or potential large impacts identified. And once that is received, the board would then be in a decision to make a determination. If you believe all those potentially large impacts that have been identified have been properly mitigated to the maximum extent practicable, then you'd issue a negative seeker declaration and allow the rest of the process that Steve described to move forward. On the alternative, if you still identify concerns that you don't believe have been suitably mitigated, would be obligated to make a positive seeker declaration. And that would start a formal EIS process, which the board has most recently seen in the recent Horton Road LLC project on Route 9. So at this point, you're now lead agency pursuant to seeker in terms of its current status. Applicant has provided parts 1 and 2 for the board's consideration and review. And you should review those documents and determine what other supplemental information should be provided by the applicant in terms of to permit you to continue your review of the project. And as Steve has also touched on, given the magnitude of the project, in the past you have utilized the services of AKRF, an environmental planning firm. I think most recently on the Hudson Highlands or Horton Road project. I've made contact with them informally, and they've expressed interest in assisting the board or supporting you in your efforts to address your environmental responsibilities. So that's a matter that you may wish to discuss tonight. I think in overview, that's where we currently stand as a board.
All right, questions for Ron, please? Anyone? So I have one for you, Ron, which is, can you help, I think for the benefit, certainly for Dennis, myself, Peter, Kim, and Neil, the exception of Heidi and Laura, could you compare or relate back to Hudson Highlands Reserve where we are now in this process relative to that process? That was the only equivalent process, and it was obviously sometime after the initial application that we eventually voted on the environmental review and declared it a positive declaration. And that was a voluminous number of studies provided, environmental and otherwise, fauna, flora, etc. Can you just give us a sense of where we are in this relative to that process?
Sure. I think as Steve has touched on, the seeker regulations mandate that you initiate seeker at the earliest opportunity of the board. Relative to Hudson Highlands, there was very significant discussion to gain the board's familiarity with the conservation subdivision regulations and the attendant determination of a permitted density for that very large project. Excuse me, that involved a very significant period before you actually began hard review of the environmental documents. So in this respect, this project doesn't address the residential component to that extent necessary in the Hudson Highlands project. So you're much further along in just a few months, beginning to initiate the review of the Part 1 and Part 2 EAF.
All right, thank you. And so as far as process, as I said earlier, we're going to go through tonight the questions that the applicant kindly went through and answered that were the boards that you had identified. And our plan would be if we can complete that or get predominantly complete with that this evening. And the next meeting, I hope we will go through the EAF parts 1 and 2 sequentially to review where we think there are gaps in knowledge that we have at this point. And we go through each box and see where we thought we had sufficient information and where we thought there was insufficient information to make a determination. Are you okay with that process, Steve and Ron?
I think that's exactly the way to approach it. Just in regard to Hudson Highland Reserve, I would point out that in that matter, the board went out of its way. I mean, really tried to avoid having to go through the EIS process. It was an expanded part 3. You went through all sorts of studies, and at the end of the day, it didn't work out, and you had to issue a positive declaration. You know, you're going to be in, I would think, something of the same boat here in terms of trying to reach a negative declaration, but hopefully, since it isn't complicated by the conservation subdivision process, we'd be able to get to the point where you make a determination one way or the other much more quickly than you did in that application.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so with that in mind, let us begin. Thank you. So, any other questions for Ron or Steve? Oh, sorry. Let's talk about the AKRF piece. I'm sorry, we didn't. Ron hit it, and I said we'd talk about that. So, I'm inclined to have their support or someone's support to guide us on the environmental because I thought they were very helpful last time. I am cognizant that is an additional voice in this work, but I'm also cognizant of the magnitude of this project and the voices, many voices in the community about this topic, as well as our need. As I said in the beginning, we're all volunteers and expertise is helpful. I think maybe Ron or Steve provide the pros and cons of having their involvement and then hear the board's perspective on that.
Well, again, the process of seeker is a very involved and significant process. Typically, you use an environmental or planning consultant to assure the board that they satisfy all statutory requirements. AKRF is a longstanding environmental firm that's done much work in the Hudson Valley. And as I said, the board has used that in the past, I think to your benefit, to walk through other projects.
They are the town's planning consultants, just like Ron's the engineering consultant and I'm the legal consultant, the attorney. So bringing them in shouldn't present a problem. They usually aren't brought in unless it's a significant project. And this, I think, would qualify both from a zoning and from an environmental standpoint as the type of thing where you might want their advice. Keep in mind, you can bring them in for as little or as much participation as you want. It's not like you're, in for a penny, in for a pound. They have to do everything. They'll answer the questions you ask and do as much or as little as you want them to do.
Okay, board questions or thoughts on having some support? Heidi, please.
Well, I have a question about what their role. So I got this a copy of a memo from Hudsonian, and I was wondering, would that be a different role from AKRF, or would that be in addition to or instead of?
And in my view, AKRF would get into many of those environmental concerns. I can't say it would look at it to the depth of Hudsonia, but they have wide background. But beyond that, they'd get into the issues of traffic or any of the other non-specific environmental concerns that Hudsonia would. So I see them as AKRF as having a more widespread breadth for the board's appreciation.
Maybe, Ron, you could provide a sense of the scope of work. I'd assume that would be opinions about the magnitude or not, but the sufficiency of the data provided so far to make a judgment and the completeness of that material. Is there other thoughts that you think they would provide us in their scope of work?
Sure. Well, if you think back to Hudson Highlands, they actually got involved in review of the town ordinances to make sure that the conservation regulations were adhered to, and the calculation provided were in compliance with your code. But they looked at the wide variety of potential environmental impacts beyond just the hard environmental of the birds and the bees, the fauna, the flora, but they got involved, as I said, in traffic, project layout, and specifics in terms of the siting of the proposed improvements in the project. That's well beyond what I believe Hudsonia would provide to this board.
Other thoughts around the board? Other questions or thoughts on that?
Well, I think, given that they are familiar, that they've done work for the town already, they are the official consultants for the town. It seems to me that, they know our zoning, they've worked with it before. So they're the logical choice as far as I'm concerned.
Anything else, Kim? Are you good? Dennis, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I agree fully with Kim. We have that relationship, and the work that they did on the Hudson Highlands project, I thought was fantastic, actually.
Good. Thank you. Peter?
I just wanted to pretty much echo the last two comments. I thought they did a really thorough and very clean job of it. And indeed, on our site visit a couple of weeks ago, I wish we'd have them there to give us some information about the northern long-eared bat. But I thought they were terrific in the other work. So they got my vote. That's all.
Other thoughts? Thank you, Peter. Okay, seems like it's the sentiment in the board to have some support. Ron, what is the procedure for engaging them to get, first of all, scope of work or support for us, and then engaging?
I've had informal discussions with representatives of that firm on the board's behalf. I mean, they're prepared to provide you with a proposal and fee schedule for your consideration. I suspect ultimately it would be a matter that the planning board recommends to the town board to engage their services. But I'll leave that to Steve to describe.
I was under the impression that they were the appointed as needed planning consultants for the town. I think they have a standard fee schedule, which they charge for any consulting work for the town. I'll double check on that, but that was certainly the case on the Wharton Road project, and I expect it's still the case in 2021. So I don't think anything needs to be done other than to advise them and the town board that they will be utilized on this project, unless, like I say, there's been some change in their fee schedule, or if the town's appointed some other planner, which I'm not aware of. They have. So I think it's still AKRF, but I think their fees are the same as they always have been. But we'll check on that. We'll check on that and get back to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so on to this document. And when I say this document, I mean the questions and the kindly read font answers by the applicant. So I don't know, Dan or Glenn, who's going to walk us through, but my thought is we'll just go linearly through them. You don't have to read the whole section, but if you give us the sense of each question, and then board members, as we follow along, can ask questions and clarifications along the way. Is that okay, Dan?
Sure, you can lead it through with the questions, Mr. Chairman. I just a couple of points, if I might indulge the board. Number one, hearing AKRF is in there, very well respected and competent, and with the board's indulgence, any questions there Mr. Gaynor may have to get up to speed for clarification of any of the documents we've submitted so far, we'd be more than glad to make our any and all of our team available to them for that purpose. Second of all, if Cheryl could let in John Canning, if he's not already allowed to speak, he's our traffic consultant. If I might just briefly introduce who's here. There's John. Of course, Davis McCallum, the artistic director of the Shakespeare Festival, is here. Katie Lieberman, the managing director. Chip Alleman from Garrison Properties. I, of course, am Dan Hollis from Hollis, Laidlaw and Simon. Glenn Watson from Beatty and Watson, our civil engineering and surveying firm. Jan Johannesson from Kellard Sessions, our environmental consultant. Leslie Perez from Nelson Bird and Woltz, our landscape architect. If I might just have a couple of minutes to
Of course, Dan. Go ahead.
express some thoughts that the client wanted me to express, and which I actually formed on my own during the walk on Sunday. It was very informational for me to be able to hear comments from people. I was sort of unobtrusive in my presence, so I was able to.
The fact that you took off the tie, Dan, I think it let you go undercover. It was smart. Smart.
That's it. That was a calculated move. I had a clip on in case I needed it, but it from my old military police stateside days, I had one of those pull-off jobs, but I left it in the car. I didn't think I'd need it, but I just wanted to make a couple of points to just clear up the record and clear up misconceptions. First of all, the Shakespeare Festival is not a new kid in town. We're not just parachuting in as some big box department store or a large factory or a manufacturing operation. We've been here for 30 years. And all we're looking to do really is to relocate about 3 miles from where we are at Boscobel. And the organization, the Shakespeare Festival, during all those 30 years hasn't been a stranger. They've been a great neighbor. They've been a contributor and an employer. And we're hopeful that the next 30 years and more will allow us to continue that role. Your board has specifically requested us and the Garrison to contemplate what the next 30 years of growth would look like. So the proposed plan encompasses just that, a long time view of the horizon. But much of what's proposed is not anticipated to be built for a now indeterminate number of years. What the proposal does contemplate, however, is and this is very important, and it's lost in a conversation about the nitty-gritty sometimes, but the proposal contemplates and will bring into reality the rehabilitation and conservation of 76 acres, 95% of the site plan, into open meadows, wildflower gardens, pedestrian pathways, and an open lawn space. The use by the festival will be a significant ecological improvement compared to the current use of golf, which uses a great deal of water, results in nitrogen-rich runoff to our waterways and wetlands, and where a grass monoculture flattens biodiversity. And the reality is that the totality of the built structures will take up 1.39 acres of the total site, very small percentage. The central to the plans is the conversion of 19 acres of existing golf fairways to parkland, trees, and meadows. The proposed conversion will reduce the amount of water required to maintain the site, diminish, if not eliminate altogether, the need for pesticides, and promote a rich ecology and habitat matrix. As the new caretakers of the property, Shakespeare Festival is committed to maintaining and restoring the existing wetlands on the site. Since the Shakespeare Festival began its life in Philipstown all those decades ago, they've been welcoming their artists into the community. In the beginning, those artists stayed in local homes, generously donated and hosted by board members and other friends of the Shakespeare Festival. Over the years, those artists have been lodged at the Graymoor Monastery, at Mount St. Mary's College in Newburgh, and most recently at the hotels at the intersection of Routes 9 and 84. In the nonprofit regional theater world, it's both the custom and the union requirement that the Shakespeare Festival, or whoever the sponsor is, provide housing for visiting artists. The zoning for the site currently allows accommodations of up to 40 rooms, including the 8 that are currently available in the inn. And what we are requesting is an increase of just 14 rooms, a total of 54 rooms with a maximum occupancy of 98 people, to allow the artists to be lodged on site in guest accommodations, not residences, as I heard that word used quite a bit and inappropriately during the course of the site walk. That use and that housing will reduce the carbon footprint and allow our offering artists to become a part of the Philipstown community during their stay as part of the cast and crew. It's important to remember that currently the property is only protected, not only in a minimalist sense, but it's protected by the zoning ordinance, which allows for all the things I've talked about, including the 40-room hotel, the spa that was never developed, the event spaces, the restaurant, and the golf course. By virtue of the extraordinary gift that Chris Davis is making and will make, Mr. Davis will ensure that permanent protection of this property from additional subdivision and residential or commercial development through deed restrictions placed as part of his gift. The transition of this site to the Shakespeare Festival will certainly ensure its permanent protection. That's pretty much all I have right now. Is there a way that Cheryl can share the listing, or can one of my team do that as a way that it'd be up on the screen so that whoever is called
Good
upon
idea.
to ask?
Good idea, Dan.
Thank you. Thanks. Leslie, can you just pull that
That's
up a little bit?
That's a different version than was sent. This is
Okay.
this one has a name. The version I have that you sent around, that you sent to all of us, is not by name, but by topic area. So I'm not sure that version, whoever showed that up, is the most current version.
All right. Allie, is that something you can pull up quickly? Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman.
So I can share whichever version it is. Just to be clear, we submitted written responses in February and March. So I'm not sure which one you're looking at, but I have both at my fingertips. If you could just read off what it
The
looks
one
like.
that was in our packets has on page 1. I'll just shove it in the screen here. I don't know if Miss you go by Allie, you said? Alexandra? Yes. So this is the version with my little chicken scratch here that was sent in our packets. So
I can't make that out.
it doesn't have Kim Connor's name on page 1.
I have
I have
two.
it.
though. In my packet, Neil, there were 2.
There are 3 altogether, Kim. There are 3 altogether. The first one, no, it's actually very simple. It's actually very simple. The first one was the February one. It has a heading at the top marked outline of initial planning board comments / inquiries. I think that's the one you have, Neil. Then there's the one they put up on the screen that has a little heading in the upper left-hand corner, HVSF written responses. And that's the one that has Kim Connor's name on it. And then there's a third one, which was also submitted, I believe, in the packet. It says supplemental traffic response. I think the one we want to work off of to start with is the one that Neil picked up, the outline of initial planning board comments.
That was our first submission.
Right. I think that's
Yep.
where Neil wants to start.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
I want everyone to be on. This is kind of amusing. This is called version control. So yeah, for those of you who deal with a lot of documents, I'm sure Dan and others do. So I guess I'd ask the board, what document did everyone use? Is it okay if we use the February, or would you the predominance of you use the March one? Because I have notes on only the February one, and I'm happy to be flexible. Dennis, go ahead.
February is the one I had been really focusing in on.
Okay, others?
Read all of them, so.
I have all of them too.
That's why you guys get the bigger.
That's that $8 an hour as well. You know,
They're getting more than they're clearly getting more than me, Dan. All right. Well, it sounds like that maybe we can use the February, because Dan decided February, and those two did everything. So
there you go.
yeah. So let's try and go. We'll go slowly. And seriously, board members, we're going to go through each section. We will pause. Please ask questions. If you have notations, if we're going too fast, tell me to slow down. So Dan's not going to read them to us, but we can go through each of the major black sections: project approvals, then land use. And we're assuming you've read it, and we should just ask questions or clarifications.
And what I'll do is I'll direct if there are further questions, I'll direct it to the right party, Mr. Chairman.
Great. So let's start with project approvals and reviews. Are there any comments or questions to any of the answers here? I'll take an uncomfortable pause for board members to just make sure they do have a chance. So then I'll ask a question if no one has one tied to, I guess, C, which really was not one that the board, the applicant answered. But can we have a sense, Ron, and I guess it'll be helpful, and I may repeat this question a couple of different ways, different times. Part of the trick that that Steve was alluding to about the zoning change needs to be, the local law needs to change, is I can't actually tell what part of the code is being applied, because I don't know what's going to change. Meaning, This is in the I believe in the RC. Is that right? Rural conservation.
And in the PDD.
Right, but this is where it gets confusing, Dan, because the zoning changed after the PDD was approved. Right, our zoning code changed in, I believe, 2011. That thing was approved in 05. So it gets a little confusing because our job is to apply the zoning code. And so I get a little tripped up because, for example, as a very minor point, the RC does not have lodging. It has a line in the box for lodging. So I guess as a more narrow question, what part of the zoning do they need a variance and or new laws for? That's where I get a little confused. What am I applying and what am I not yet applying because we need a new law?
Well, their amendments, they wouldn't be variances, they would be amendments to the laws, and I respectfully submit it would be both, because the PDD covers it's a particularly created district that's within the RC zone, so it's the macro and micro within it. If Steve has a different view, then he can let you know, but am I correct?
I think we lost Steve's technology.
Oh, no, I'm
there
here.
we go.
I completely agree with Dan as far as that goes. It's a little confusing in that the code itself doesn't seem to have a specific reference to the Garrison Golf Course Plan Development District. But clearly, I think it was 2005 that was adopted.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. The local law, the change in zoning didn't destroy the district. I think it still exists, albeit not specifically referenced, as a PDD district. The board could almost think of it as an overlay type of a thing. It's not quite an overlay, but it's along those lines. And I would expect that there will be a local law enacting specifically the revised Garrison Golf PDD. I'm not sure that'll be the name of it, but I mean, it'll be something like that, some land development district. And it will include whatever setbacks, uses, et cetera, need to be put into place to allow the proposed development to go forward. Now, if the town board doesn't agree that a particular aspect of the development should be allowed to go forward, that's not going to be in the local law. And so the plans will change and the planning board will have to act accordingly. But that's what it'll be, Neil. It'll be another section, probably to the use tables, an amendment, and probably to the section, there's at least one that lists the special districts within the town, and I expect it would be to those sections of the code.
And there will be some deletions as well. You know, some things that are in there now will be deleted.
The things that weren't developed, the spa and whatnot, I suppose.
Right.
I believe there is a section in the current zoning law that specifically says that the PDD survives.
Can someone get us a citation on that, please? Because this is where it gets, again, if the PDD supersedes the old zoning and the new zoning by being an island unto itself, I gets a little confusing about what then survives in the zoning that we have to apply. Again, as you can tell, it's a little circular and a little confusing for us because we don't generally have things that sit outside of the zoning.
It would have been cleaner, Neil, if the town board had kept a separate specific section describing the uses and the setbacks and bulk requirements of the Garrison Golf PDD. Apparently they did not. Glenn says that there's a specific reference to it. I don't doubt that's the case. Like I said, it's my understanding that it did survive. Once this new local law is enacted, I expect there will be a separate specific section of the code addressing all the concerns you just raised. But that's not something that the planning board needs to worry about right now. What you need to do is analyze the project as proposed. If the zoning doesn't come to pass later on, the project's, well, it's going to be either modified or not go forward.
Yeah.
But that's not something for now. That's for down the road.
Right. And simply stated,
If I may just respond, I think if you look at 175-24, paragraph S and the F in the current code, it does address the issue of the PDD.
One more time, Ron, please.
175-24 F as in Frank. It talks about the prior PDD zoning.
Thank you. That's
Thank
very
you.
helpful.
and I think that in a simplistic way, the PDD is a district within the RC district. So it's a smaller part of the overall RC district.
Right, so I'll pause and let my colleagues ask other questions because I can hit the same topic in a different area. So any other
Excuse
questions
me.
on project approvals and reviews section? Okay. All right, let's open up on land use, zoning, and layout, which I was starting to bleed into. So if no one has a question, I will then ask one, which is again, Ron or Steve, one of the things we spend an enormous amount of time on Hudson Highlands Reserve, which you both stated very clearly earlier, was the number of houses and the number of things that were being built. And we spent a lot of time on calculations, and Joe Giginta and I sat there doing math with our fingers each time to try and count how many buildings. And I remember distinctly being very impressed by his air math that he did so easily and thoughtfully. I keep trying to figure out what is, and I think Neil Toman said this well last time, what are the volume of buildings and facilities that can be on this property? And I, again, went to the zoning code because that's what we're told to do when we did this job for reference. But I don't know where to refer to the volume of buildings and facilities, because then again, I'm told that it's not in the RC, it's in the PDD, but then the PDD needs to be changed. So help me with some guidance about the volume of buildings and facilities that are allowed on this property, since the zoning code apparently does not apply in that same sense.
Well, Neil, let me say this to you. Even if you had a section before you which said, you know, whatever the percentage of lot coverage is, or, you know, the limiting somehow or other the number of residences on the property, what you have to keep in mind is on this project, because it's a planned development, it's going to be going to the town board asking for approval of exactly the amount of buildings that they are proposing. If the town board approves that, then the zoning's not an issue. What you need to concentrate on is forget about allowed, not allowed as far as the code goes. The environmental impacts of the proposed development. That's the issue before you. And again, you know, our planning consultant may, you know, when you want to bring on, may be of assistance in that. I expect Ron could help to some extent, but I mean, you know, he's not a planner. No offense, Ron, but so I mean, those are the issues that you might want to put to them. But don't worry about it in terms of what the zoning code allows. Worry about the impacts that the proposed development will have.
The other day, a question came up about the number of buildings, and Leslie Perez from Nelson Bird Waltz, our landscape architect, prepared a chart, I think, which would be very instructive. We'll send it in. We just finished it today, but can we share two things at once? Allie? No?
I think that's exceeding Zoom's skill, but a thoughtful idea, Dan.
No,
But you can exchange
I
it
can
for a second if you'd like. That's fine.
Yeah,
I can swap it out if you'd like.
yeah,
Okay, give
swap
me a
that out for
second.
just a second, if you would, Allie. I don't
Yeah.
touch those things for fear of
Give me 1 second.
Armageddon.
Yeah, us dumb army guys, Dan, we can't do much, you know. 10
Nope.
fingers, 10 toes, that's all we got.
Yeah, just check
Can
your
you
gear,
guys see this now?
No,
no.
no.
No. Okay.
You have to
hold on.
unshare, you have to unshare your screen first and then reshare it.
Okay.
Allie, let me try. I have it up as well.
Oh, good, thanks,
I got
Leslie.
it.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Leslie.
So there you see, Leslie, if you'd like to take them through it, we have the existing, the proposed, and then the new total.
Mm-hmm. Right.
There's-
So this is just total number of buildings. It's not talking about coverage or square footage. But if we're looking at the existing site, we've categorized by use here what is currently on the site. So it's predominantly the golf facilities, the restaurant, wedding venue, Chip's residence, and then some maintenance structures for a total of 10 buildings. The new buildings being proposed largely revolve around theater space, back of house space, and community space, in addition to some additional hospitality buildings, including the guest accommodations and the inn, and the new residence for Chris Davis as well. So it's a total of 29 new buildings. And then this table on the right-hand side shows the total number of buildings on the completed site once full build out were to be completed, which brings the total to 35. And so because some buildings are being repurposed, some buildings are being taken down or relocated, we're looking at a total net increase of 25 buildings on the site. Again, at lots of different sizes and scales.
Neil?
Please, Heidi, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just want to make it, I think following up on your comment, Neil, that this has been a helpful discussion because my understanding was when we considered the environmental impacts, we should consider what was already permitted to be built. So like we should only look at what assuming you could build whatever was already permitted in the PDD, we should only consider the environmental impacts beyond that. But I guess what I'm understanding from this discussion is that's not what we consider. Actually, what we should consider in the environmental impacts is not what's already been permitted in the PDD, but actually we have to look at just what's presently there, not what could be built under the PDD by the applicant, but actually what will, even though in a phased fashion, be built ultimately on the site. So actually, I was under the impression that the environmental impacts should just be beyond the PDD, actually. So that's not the case.
Oh, it's both. It's both. It's the entire impact of what's there now and what is proposed in addition to that.
But I think, but based on the fact that you're saying what we need to look at is not really what, I don't think that's entirely consistent with the idea that we're not supposed to look at just the zoning is outside of, is sort of beyond us in a way, because it's going to go before the town board. I mean, what we really need to consider in the environmental impacts is anything that will be added, I think.
Well, it's both. It's that the impacts of the entire project, what's there now and what's proposed to be added, both. For example, there's a golf course there now, okay? And there are going to be vehicle trips to the golf course as people go and play golf. When you consider the environmental impacts, you consider both the additional vehicle trips from the proposed new construction and new uses and the existing impact of the existing vehicle trips.
Understood. For example, the inn, for example, the 40-room inn, I sort of thought, okay, we shouldn't really consider the environmental impacts of that because they already could build it in a way. So it's just like it's the cottages, but not necessarily the inn. I understand the 9 holes are going to come off the property. Understood. But you see my point?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
But I think we're saying the same thing just from different aspects.
I actually think you're saying different. I think you're saying different things. I think
really?
I'm hearing what I do get Heidi's question. She is asking you, is it the whole thing from right now to the end, or does she start at like point B, meaning what was already approved and just go to C? And you're saying, Steve, I think go from A to C, not B to C. So Heidi, is that clear? He's saying
that's what I'm asking. Yeah.
So he's saying do the totality of the thing.
So I just want to say, like, I agree. And I think that unfortunately, I think the answer is a combination of both, right? So for example, if you have 18 holes and you're reducing yourself to 9, there are some plus and minuses, right? So there are some subtractions and then there's some additions, and some of those subtractions subtract out of the additions. So the net increase is actually less than what you're actually proposing. So I do know that I think the applicant has actually provided that, but I don't think it's actually consolidated all on a single matrix. So for every net increase, I know that there might be a decrease due to what was in the PDD or what was in the existing that is being removed to then wash out whatever the net increase is. I don't think that we've seen that fully captured. So like, for example, in this matrix, what shows to me is you've got existing, what you're proposing new, to then equal to additive. I don't actually see the delta between the existing to the new to like how all of that communicates into the new calculation. And then to the point of what Neil was getting at is you've given us a total of buildings, but I think we also have to look at the total number of buildings to then how it relates to the total amount of square footage. And I think those two components are missing. And I don't know if that's something that you can just add so that it's easy for us to refer back to.
I think if Mr. Johannesson can chime in, I think we did include that in our original submission in December.
We did, yeah, we did in this past submission in March, where we attempted to, where we provided a table. It was entitled Comparison Table, Garrison Golf Club and Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival Comparison Table. And it went through various different parameters and compared the existing condition to the 2005 PDD and the proposed condition. And then showed the delta between the 2005 approval and the proposed condition.
You have it up on the screen, right?
Yeah. We tried to hit all the items that have been discussed over the last several meetings, and there are some square footages of various buildings. You got to remember that, you know, we do have the right to build what was approved in the 2005 PDD, right? We have site plan approval on that, and it was completed under SECRA. So I think, to follow up on the conversation just earlier, it's kind of both. I think we have to analyze and compare columns A and C, but also B and C. So you could see the delta between what's there now and what's proposed, but also what was approved and we're allowed to build versus what's proposed, because they're different.
But John, and there's also a little bit more than that. It goes into more detail. For example, in the traffic, we'll indicate how much traffic would have been generated by the PDD and how much traffic will be generated by the proposed request. And I suspect that Glenn will do the same for stormwater and stuff like that. In fact, I see it there, but it'll be kind of totaled up.
Yeah, this was just an attempt to compare some of the larger parameters to the three conditions.
So that sort of talks up to the point that was raised about the, you know, the comparison, the chairman's question about what percentages and whatever. We've done it as best we can, and we'll continue to expand on that as we go through the EAF with Mr. Gaynor and the board and AKRF.
Very helpful. Dan, you can just call me Neil.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. All right. So, So that is land use and zoning layout. There's another section after the tables. Are there any other questions? There's a section under maybe page 3. Ma'am, could you put that? Thank you, Allie. Thank you. Put that back up. This is a way to guide us through. So, are there any other comments or questions to this section from any board member? There's a detailed section, letter E, specific project issues. And I don't know if people have questions along the way. We'll pause and give a very uncomfortable pause and let people raise any questions. Okay, in the absence of them asking, then I guess, oh, go ahead, please.
So my questions are about the cottages. And I don't know if we've gotten to them yet, because I understand that they're not residences per se, in the way that a house is a residence. I read in here somewhere that, I guess my question is really like, I don't really understand how they're going to fit into the landscape. I don't know if that's the appropriate thing to ask right now, because we walked on that road on the site visit on Sunday, and it seemed like there would be an awful lot of cut and fill to fit them in there. Mm-hmm. And I understand that there's a desire to give, there's a couple of things. It's architectural fashion of the moment to sort of hark back to the Catskills and you know, little summer camps and things like that. And to stay away from, you know, suburban development of hotels. But it just seems to me that it's an awful lot of housing really close together, not really environmentally friendly because each one of them has to be heated and cooled individually. And I really just think that from my point of view, it might be better to take a step back and think about how you might be able to carve up that 40-room hotel into different pieces and you'd have less infrastructure with a couple of buildings, with 3 buildings, than you will with 15 buildings, you know?
Yeah, and that's where we're open to discussion because, you know, we're interested in its function at the moment. We're not at the design phase quite yet. So, you know, we hear you, and so we'll keep pushing on that.
Very
I think
helpful.
that's my chief question at the moment, since we are, you know, that's what's on the screen at the moment. So
I have a question about that page too.
Please go, Heidi.
I may have misunderstood, but at the site visit, it sounded like, in addition to being used by the actors during the time when the plays are being put on, you guys plan to Airbnb-ish. I don't mean to use a pejorative expression, but rent them out to other people, kind of, you know, so they're used essentially sort of year round. I know not for long term, not as like, you know, rental homes for people, but that was the impression I got at the site visit, which I didn't see in this anywhere in here, and I may have missed it, but it's sort of like vaguely Airbnb-ing them.
It's more like an inn, you know, than an Airbnb. You know, Airbnb you know, that's something I just don't know enough about how that operation is going to be handled by the hotel function. It's a part of the hotel operation. So Airbnb, to me, I agree with the pejorative connotation people have to it, that, you know, it's sort of a rental where it's party city or something like that. But the hotel operator will have control over how they're meted out. And we haven't, I mentioned, I think, to the group or some of the group on Sunday that we are willing to limit lengths of stay there so that it won't become an Airbnb type of thing where someone will, other than an artist, will be there for an extended stay. And, you know, Davis or Katie can talk about that a little bit, or Chip better than I. If Chip wanted to talk about that for a second.
Yes, I mean, the idea would be that right now we use our rooms for not only for weddings, we have over 125 weddings a year here. So a lot of weddings and a lot of, during the week, it would be people that are just coming to the area for hiking. So the idea would be that right now we send most of our wedding guests to Fishkill, to hotels up there. Most of the weddings take blocks of, I don't know, 20 or 40 rooms and come here by bus. And having more rooms here on site would be an advantage to be able to keep people that are visiting the Garrison in our community staying here. So the idea we've always, that's why we originally had the 40-room hotel in the PDD, is the idea that we would have additional accommodation on site.
Other questions?
Thank you, Chip.
Neil, if I could jump in.
Yeah,
just
Neil,
for a
please.
Second, thank you. I want to sort of agree with Kim on the footprint and getting towards having the different separate structures, which I know look really good on the visuals. They did a nice job with them, but what concerns me is when you have that many individual buildings, is not just the buildings, but the space between them, and I see a lack of storage space in these individual cottages. So when I'm drawing this and when I'm pulling it up on a model to sort of look at how it's going to function, I see the space between the buildings being filled with bicycles and toys and individual garbage cans and recycling bins, and it doesn't lend itself towards being a tidy operation. Whereas if you were to consolidate, then one of the nice things about consolidating the buildings is that you have you know, you have a dumpster out back and you have bike racks up front and you have a way to, this is why colleges go to dormitory settings, because it's a more efficient way of setting it up. And I think it makes it cleaner. The other thing is we have 39 buildings in the final schedule. I saw that up just a little while ago, 39 buildings. And are we sticking with 15,600, let's call it, you know, 16,000 gallons of water a day with that 39 building schedule?
Glenn,
Yes. All of those buildings were taken into account, and not all of, I think it was 35 that we ended up with. I think there were 4 of them that are replacement buildings. But we did count all of the rooms in the inn and the lodging for the artists, and we counted all of the buildings for their intended use.
And you're sticking with 16,000 gallons a day.
Yeah, I think
I don't have the number in front of me, but
well, it's on the.
It's not changed. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I think the Part 1 EAF will end up getting, I think that's the number in the Part 1 EAF, Neil.
Okay.
That number is going to get increased because it didn't account for irrigation. So in the table that we provided that was just up, the total new proposed is 32,082 gallons, 17,000 approximately is for domestic use and 15,000 gallons for irrigation.
Okay, well, I'm less concerned with irrigation because I know that comes out of your ponds. I'm more concerned with domestic use because to me that doesn't add up for that amount of buildings and that many people to only be using 15,000 gallons a day. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, the updated domestic is 17,082 gallons.
Still sounds a little low, but okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Neil, and maybe this is for Ron. Neil, what is when you're saying it feels low, what is a planning number we should be using then, if not 17,000 for? And I must admit, I keep forgetting how many rooms we're talking about if you include all the buildings. So maybe you remind me of that number too.
It's 54.
54 rooms or 54 people?
54 rooms.
54 rooms. So
there is a book, we call it the Blue Book, and maybe I think most people call it the Blue Book, but there is a book that contains gallons per day per use. A bedroom is 150 gallons per day, and that assumes that there are 2 people in a bedroom. That's in a house. A bar, I think a bar is 15 gallons per seat per day. So each of the proposed uses can be found in this Blue Book. That is what you have to prove to the health department. You have to use in order to build your demand for water and thus your delivery to the septic system. You have to use those charts in order to come up with the gallons per day, and that's exactly what we did. So they're also, incidentally, you'll see that as you go through there, because I'm sure it's in this, there was a reduction that's been allowed. 150 gallons a day a few years ago was 200 gallons a day per bedroom, because the water consumption in showers and in toilets has been basically reduced, human consumption. So when we estimated those demands, we used that Blue Book, and I'm sure we provided those calculations.
Steve or Ron, is there a way to cross-reference this in the process to some other local similar facilities, let's say Graymore, the Walter Hovig home? Is there a path for us to cross-reference other local facilities and sort of see if we're in the right ballpark with these numbers for the water consumption?
We could ask the applicant to analyze other local activities or uses that you might define similar, but at the end of the day, just as Mr. Watson describes, for their purposes, they're obligated to use the New York State standards in order to satisfy the adequacy of their water and sewer systems.
Okay.
And,
All right.
and earlier, if I might repeat something I said before, with 54 rooms, 98 people to be lodged on site.
Okay, thank you.
Is that helpful?
It is, thank you.
Other
The
other
breakdown of,
questions?
the
Oh,
breakdown of
sorry.
those rooms is included in the table in terms of what's provided in the inn and the artist accommodations.
Other thoughts in this section? Let's continue to toggle down, I think, through it. Let's pause there for a second. So I do have a numbers question for the applicant, because I'm comparing. I know you've got the page cut in half a little bit. At the top of this page, in the paragraph called "More information about the performers accommodations." Yes, thank you. Right there, you state there's 14. You just went, yeah, right. Shit. Where is it? Where's the net? Keep. Yeah, stop right there. Okay. Increase of 14. That's hilarious. Thank you for your indulgence. Yeah, here an increase of 14 rooms. But at the bottom of the page, the same page, just go all the way to the bottom. There's about 8 dot points at the bottom of the same page. You'll keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Thank you. In that series of dot points, in the third from the bottom, it says additional new in 20 rooms. I'm getting a little lost in all the different counts in different places. I'm sure it's internally consistent, but I must say, and I know this format does not lend itself. It seems like the table that I can't find the woman's name on this Leslie showed. I'm getting a little confused by the different counts, and the reason why I'm asking is not because I'm trying to do gotcha here. I'm trying to answer the question for myself. When we go through the EIS, the EAF part 2, and we start seeing major impact, it kind of helps me to figure out what are we talking about? Because at some point, the land itself, the location would be too small to handle. It would have too major of an impact. Now, I don't know what that is. I don't know how many rooms and how many people and how many cars and how many buildings become too much. But at some point, that is effectively what we're being asked to do. How much volume of stuff is having a major impact that can't be practically mitigated? So I'm struggling to try and just make sure I understand the volume of work being done, and the building count was very helpful. But as a minor point, just confirm with me again, maybe we need what in my business we call a waterfall chart, which starts with what exists now, what you have approved for, and what you're adding. Because I'm trying to get all the additional rooms. You've done a good job with the building. Kim asked we need it for square footage. But then I need some guidance. And again, maybe Ron and Steve, we need this from AKRF. How much volume of stuff occurring becomes an...
Yeah, Allie, maybe it's helpful to put up the other table, because I think that's accounted for in the...
You know, to put it in simple terms, there are 8 rooms in the current inn, plus 20 rooms in the inn, plus 26 in the additional lodging, for a total of 54 rooms and 98 people. So from how I get my head around it, Neil, is I just think 54 rooms, 98 people, 54 rooms, 98 people. That's no matter how you configure it, that's what it's going to be.
That's very helpful.
Sorry, can I just also add? So I guess my question is, with regard to the impact, is it's not just the rooms, right? So it's everything. So at peak, so assuming you have a production that's happening, so you have 300 and some odd people that are there, you have some X amount of people at the restaurant, X amount of people lodging, X amount of folks like on the property. You know, I think one of the things that I'm still quite not sure about is how many public toilets there are to the theater, you know, in addition to. And so the total, like, so what is the total impact? What is the total impact of the total use of water, sewer, storm, everything at its peak? And then from the peak, then understanding what the average is on like a day-to-day use.
I don't know the answer to that about, I'll let others who might know the number of toilets that are projected, and we have worked on a total mass of all events going on at one time, Ms. O'Connell, a wedding, dining, to the year-round theater and the tent, everything being operational at once, as to how we would manage it from parking and traffic standpoint. Is there someone, Leslie or Davis or Katie, who knows the answer about the bathrooms? I do not. But whatever it is, I'm sure there's a requirement, that a health department requirement, that we provide a certain number based upon maximum capacity, and we'll do that. I just don't know the answer right now. We'll get it for you though.
It might not be there yet.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'm sure that the building code, there is a building code where it says like per your population, you have to have a fixture count per your population. So that should actually be part of your application, because that will demand a certain amount of use based upon the amount of fixtures that you're going to have to provide for your total population.
We'll have that for you by next month to try to figure that out by maximum population at any one time.
Laura, very good point. Heidi, please go ahead.
Well, I kind of related to that, and I don't know if this is skipping sort of ahead in the document, but I see that you guys have indicated that when during the times of performances or something, when to try to maybe pull back a little bit on the number of people at the site, other certain uses, you'll try to sort of stage the uses. But I'm wondering how you will do that with the public portions of the property, like with the gardens, the sort of like the public features. Doesn't necessarily just have to do with the toilets, but in general, just how many people, cars, how you'll prevent people from just sitting on the lawn, enjoying the lovely wildflower gardens, etc. While performances, how you would actually enforce your suggestion that you would try to limit these other kind of like more public
interlopers. We might call them interlopers.
I'm just thinking about like at the Metropolitan Museum of Art when they say, everybody get out, the museum's closing at 5. Like, how are you going to actually get everybody off of there?
I think Davis has an idea of how to handle that, if he could chime in on that.
Thanks, Dan. We've been thinking a lot about this in particular. I think we should start from the fact that we want the property to be open for the same kind of passive uses that community members have enjoyed in its current use as a golf course. People go there to walk their dogs or go for a jog. And I want to assure community members that can continue. We're also exploring ways that we could put a cap on the number of people. I think it was Mr. Tillman who asked a good question about, how can you put a limit on the number of people who could use the open space in a given day. And there are ways we could use technology to do that. So there would be a total number of, a zero cost ticket that a person could buy to come and enjoy the grounds, even if you're not going to the play. And on days when we have 2 performances on Saturday, say, we could just not open the grounds for those kinds of uses. We've been talking to other organizations, arboretums and universities about how they monitor public use of private land. But I think the big takeaway is it's not a public park, and at the same time we want people to be able to use it in the way that they've become accustomed to under Chris Davis's ownership.
Glenn, do you want to say something?
No,
You're off mute. So a couple things, Davis. I don't think I appreciate you saying Neil Tillman's question was a good question. I'm pretty confident that any question this board is asking is a good question, because we're trying really hard to think about everything. So even if it's a stupid question, it's probably a good question because it helps us understand what we don't understand, which is important here. Secondly, I think if you just, for the applicant, hopefully it's obvious But the sentiment of this board as we're groping around this project is not that it's not a good project. And Dan, your opening speech and showing a couple of letters to the editor all state the same thing. I'm sure every single one of this board feels. This is a good project for town, that we are a big fan of Shakespeare, that we're a big fan of Chris Davis. I think you could stipulate that, as lawyers like to say, Dan, that we all believe that. I don't think anyone has any view that this is a bad project in any way, shape, or form. So, and we can state that each time we meet, but I'm confident everyone feels that it's a good thing for Philipstown. I'm confident if I surveyed this board, everyone would say that. I think what we are wrestling with, what we're groping with, is how much is too much? How much activity can this area handle? That is what I think that is the genesis of every question, and that is the direction of what we're trying to get to. Because as we answer the EAF and vote one way or the other after we accept the EAF, which is our document, I think we have to have a viewpoint of what is too much. And I think that is the sine qua non of everything we're asking, from the number of people to the number of buildings to the gallons of water to the number of toilets. It's all the same thing. It's just different parts of the elephant. Some is smooth, some is rough, some is fluffy. It's still an elephant. We're trying to figure that out. So I state that not just for the applicant, but for those members of the public listening. That is what we're trying to do here as a group. And
I
it is not.
I appreciate that, and I certainly understand and realize that that's the sentiment, and I also realize your duty to dig into the details. And I'm confident.
And I don't mean this.
We'll
I'm not saying that this moment to say that you don't think we are. I want to make sure it's clear where we're all coming from.
I know that, and I appreciate it. You want the other one back up, Neil?
Yeah, let's keep going. We've got another 14 minutes of this section. And I'm sorry to time box this project that is obviously very important to the community, but we have other applicants that we have to attend to tonight. So I think we're up to, I think we got pretty close to geology and soils, unless people have other questions on page 5 or comments. And again, board members, this is if you have a comment, feel free to, or a question, whatever you want to ask. This is your chance to swim around.
Go to the next page, Allie. Are you able to?
Which page are you guys seeing right now?
I'm seeing 4 of 18, and it went blank for a minute, Allie.
Okay.
And I think we want to get to 5 of 18.
I'm back.
There we go. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Board members, questions on this page, again, or comments, whatever you have. Noise pollution, light pollution, overall site capacity, or some of the topics. Kim, do you have something?
So a bunch of these things, we're going to get more information, correct?
Correct. Part of the part 2 is you'll ask us for further analysis of certain aspects of the project.
Yeah,
that's exactly
so
right.
I think for a lot of this document, that these are answers to these questions, but at some, we're going to say, okay, so what are you giving us to give us more information? Right? Because for example, where it says overall site, we will look at traffic volumes, all major intersections, roads on the site, identify signage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I assume that stuff will be provided to us, right?
We're working on all of that. That's correct. What this document is, those were questions that Mr. Gaynor posed to us the first meeting where we started to dive into this. And the red ink is our response to those questions posed by Mr. Gaynor and the board.
Right, I know. So what I'm saying is, like, we're going, as we go through this, I think a lot of us don't have a lot of questions because we've already read through it and we see what your answers are. And if we have questions, the things that are going to be the answers to our questions are going to come, because it's a document we want to see that talks about traffic volume.
And if I can just interrupt for a second here, that's really the whole point of part 2 of the EAF that we'll get to, because they give you specific examples of what might be a large impact, or they give you some guidance there, and they focus on on the things that are important to the environment and try to bring it orderly into it. We were trying in this document, we're trying to address some of the concerns and let you know we're looking at them. But it was really when we get down to the EAF that we focus in on the very specific issues.
And
And,
the
and,
EAF
and
brings
as I
more
said,
structure.
as I said earlier, we're going to in our next meeting toggle through the EAF
Right.
and see if we have what they used to call on a version of the SAT data sufficiency. Do we have enough to evaluate it, and or are there studies needed? So for those of us around during the Hudson Highlands Reserve, you may remember voluminous studies done about rattlesnakes, etc. If we feel like we need data because we don't have it, we will ask for it at that point. Heidi, go ahead, please.
Real quick, and I don't want to take too much time because I know we're rushing. but a
No,
little bit.
no, we're not rushing. We're not rushing.
Okay.
Take as much
So
time. as
one
you need.
question I have about the dark sky is if it would seem surprised. I know that during performances, obviously there's going to be light. But even when there's not performances, when you're attracting so many additional people to the property, it would surprise me if, you wouldn't have to have some lights on throughout the property just for safety. If you're, going to have so many more people around on the property, including the public areas. I'm just trying to get a sense of how dark, because obviously that greatly affects what I understand that maybe you're not going to have like a tremendous amount of wildlife on a golf course, but maybe some things can creep across kind of thing. And my question is really like, is it actually going to be dark? Like, so that some creatures can still, roam around a little bit at night? Will it actually be dark the way it is now at night? Or how much more light will it have to be for safety, to reduce criminal activity, for liability reasons, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to get an understanding of that.
Sure. The public areas are only going to be open till dusk. So the lighting after dusk won't be a factor in that regard.
Okay.
And the lighting that we will have is going to be dark sky compliant.
Dark sky
I think they're
compliant.
going to be full cutoff fixtures, not on angles pointed to the ground. We might have pathway lighting for some of the paths, bollard lighting, that type of thing. It's open.
But the basic truth is that the basic fact is that whereas the golf ended when the sun went down because no one's playing golf at night, this operation is from, if I remember correctly, until 11 p.m. at night. Is that correct?
Which part of the operation? The restaurant?
Well, the document states till 11 p.m. That's inclusive, I assume, of theatrical events as well as the restaurant.
Yes.
So,
Well, on those nights, there'll be lighting for safety purposes, but on non-event nights, there'll be a minimal lighting on site for the reasons we don't want to attract people. The darkness, and at dusk, the lights will be off on non-performance nights.
but Dan, as I understand that since this is a full year facility, including an indoor theater as well, there will be very few nights that are not performance nights.
I don't know how that's going to work in the wintertime when the new indoor theater is built. Katie or Davis, do you have an idea about how many days a week that theater will be operational at that time?
We think it could run until the end of October or November, another several weeks after the tent closes. And it could start performances again in the early part of the spring and in February, say. But it wouldn't be as many performances a week. And it's a much smaller theater, 220 seats.
Davis, you have a very different New York than I live in, because the New York I live in has February being the dead of winter, as opposed to this early spring you're describing. Please God, if February was early spring.
So
Kim, go ahead, then Peter.
just for comparison purposes, how do you think, Davis, it's going to compare to the kind of lighting that you have at Boscoville? Will there be more light? Will there be, will it be, Boscoville, sometimes it's very dark working through the parking lot to get out. Will it be like that?
No, after the performances, there'll be very strategic lighting on those paths to allow audience members and staff members to return from the theater to the parking lot safely. But then, once the grounds are clear, we'll have control over that lighting and we'll turn them off. That's the idea, is to, hit the spot where it's safe for people when they're on the site, but that it's dark for environmental concerns when people are not on the site.
Okay, Peter?
I was just wondering that a number of these questions, like the dark sky, compliancy, and noise impact, aren't those we're going to be guided by the town code on a number of those things? And if we're going to be going over that, whose lap does that get thrown into?
Well, in fact, Peter, the secret is there are specific sections for those various topics that we are actually being guided to understand whether, in fact, it is a major impact. So to Steve's point, again, in some ways, the zoning code does not apply in some sense because the PDD is the operating language. And all we have to do is gauge whether this volume of activity, not all we have to do, we have to gauge whether this volume of activity is a major impact that has been as mitigated as possible. So I think that's actually, it's frankly the facts these gentlemen bring to us that we use to judge.
Okay, so it's so if it supersedes what the town code allows, it's already been dealt with, or will be dealt with in the seeker.
Well, actually, if I might, Mr. Lewis, the site plan that we're proposing, where it requires additional leniency, so to speak, that would be an amendment to the ordinance to accomplish that. Because right now, for example, a theater is not permitted in the PDD. So all the uses, primary and ancillary to that theater use, we have to make the proper accommodations in the law to permit it. So that's why there's a contemporaneous review of both secret and the site plan as a very logical and efficient way to look at what we intend to do there and how it can be accomplished by any amendments to the law that might be required or not.
Okay, yeah, I understand the amendments really are the thing we're talking about. Well, thank you very much.
Well, maybe back to Steve or Ron. I do think what Peter's trying to get at is something I was describing earlier, which is how does Peter make a judgment about the impact, for example, on noise, and whether that's a major impact and whether it should be a positive or negative declaration based upon the magnitude of that impact for noise, for example.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Ron, did you want that or?
No, I'll let you jump in.
Okay. So the gauging of the magnitude of the impacts and whether they're significant adverse impacts or not is strictly a secret issue that has nothing to do with the town code. It deals with how many people are affected, the degree to which they're affected, how widespread it is, and so forth. Okay. If you determine that there is a major impact, we'll pick on light for example. Okay, so you determine there's going to be major impact from the lighting of the site, and you determine that they haven't done enough to mitigate that to the maximum extent practical. They haven't done everything they could to mitigate the light impacts. The town board is not going to be able to adopt zoning or land use regulations that would allow that particular lighting for the PDD if the SECRA determination is they haven't mitigated it to the maximum extent practicable. So the SECRA determination is going to inform to a large degree what the town board can approve in the zoning. They have to shape their plan now so that there either are no significant adverse environmental impacts, or if there are, they've been mitigated to the maximum extent practical. And then after that, the town board can enact whatever use and bulk requirements are necessary. So don't get hung up on the use or bulk requirements or thinking that, SECRA doesn't impact them. SECRA comes first. Like I said at the beginning, look at the impacts of what's being proposed and base your SECRA review on that. And then after that, the site plan and the special use permit, subdivision, and all that.
I can see that, but it seems awfully subjective. I mean, how does one decide whether or not it's too much light or too,
You did it already, Peter. You did it for Hudson Highlands Reserve.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to get input from your experts. They're going to tell you that this is, common or isn't common, or Glenn made reference to the water, for example. New York State has standards on some things. I don't think light is one of them, but water, there certainly would be. If traffic was the issue, you would consult traffic experts, and they would assist you in making your determination. Secret regulations themselves set forth criteria as to whether or not, and it's broad brush strokes, I admit, but still, whether something is considered a significant impact or not. And when the time comes, we can go over that in greater detail.
Okay.
Yeah,
Laura's
it's going to be
Laura,
subjective to some
more to
extent,
come.
but not completely.
Laura, to you, please. You've been very patient. Thank you.
No, it's okay. So I guess to that point, I guess this is what I was asking in the beginning. So for clarification, I do know that based upon your responses from the applicant, they have said that they have hired consultants to do the following things, right? To do noise pollution studies, to do light pollution studies. So at what point do we get that information to then inform us to then make decisions? You know, granted, there are certain codes that we can follow, which is great, but you know, I would think that it would be at the best interest of the applicant to then provide those studies on their consultants to then provide us with the information for us to then make an informed decision. So I guess
So-
my question is when, like, if the applicant has those, when are we getting that? And at what point do we review that to then make the determination to go to secret?
Jan, you
So-
want to?
Yeah,
So let me just let's say this for a second. Hold on. So Laura, what I said we're gonna do the next meeting is we're gonna go through the EAF in detail, page by page, section by section, and determine whether we have sufficient data to make a determination. And so I think we're gonna go page by page, section by section, which is why it's not about the zoning code. It's about the input that we need to make the decision from other sources, because the zoning code is gonna change based upon what the local law is. So Mr. Johansson, go ahead. Oh,
Yep.
there's the timer. Go ahead, sir.
Oh,
I think we're hoping to use the Part 2 EAF to identify what you all think we should be studying in the Part 3. There's a lot of evaluation that we still need to do. We haven't completed all of the studies. What we're looking for is to determine what studies should be completed. So we're hoping by going through the Part 2 and going through that framework that we'll develop a list of everything we need to do, all the data that we need to provide you so that you can make that informed decision. And we started doing that and putting together a framework in an outline. We called it the Expanded Part 3 Scope Outline. It was submitted in February, of different things and items that we would expect to study in the Part 3. And I think between, you know, going through the Part 2 next month and going through that outline, we will then be kind of charged with preparing all those reports and studies so that you can make that decision. You certainly don't have all the information to make that decision now. We haven't done the lighting study. We haven't done a photometric plan yet. We haven't completed the noise study. So you're not going to be able to say whether there's an impact or not, because you don't have the information yet. But we're trying to figure out what information we need to provide you. So we're looking for that guidance.
Which is why I think we could benefit by AKRF's input or some other body. And I think that makes sense to use them, because I think we need some guidance. Again, my only, and I think Kim, Dennis, Neil, and Peter if we're not experts, we at least did this in detail once before, and given the magnitude of this. So I think that's what we'll do next time. Let me pause for any additional or final comments. So because we do have a number of agenda items still this evening.
sure.
Other comments from board members, parting shots, if you will.
Okay, I'll give him a parting shot, Neil.
Okay.
Absolutely. All right, so we've gone through, and I appreciate the answers, and I've as many of you have, we've talked to engineers, and we've been assured that we're going to approve it with the water schedule, we're going to approve it with the light schedule, we're going to approve it with the traffic schedule, which is great, which is how you do it. As far as the traffic, I'm going to ask the applicant to do me a favor. And when you do your traffic study, moving north on Route 9, I see 3 places on Route 9. I see Marist College, CIA, and FDR as being very similar facilities. As you're moving north on Route 9, they're all on your west. And so when you frame your traffic study, do me a favor, show me how, because those are easily accessible. We can all see them. Many of us go through there. Show me how they're going to be similar, bigger, different, whatever, but please use some local references that we can sort of wrap our head around. Because for me, it's a lot easier to do that than to say, well, Schedule B, line 3 says this is how many cars. spare, sort of give me some more real world answers like we have at CIA, Marist, and FDR, and that would help me. Thank you.
I'm sure Mr. Canning can come up with something that will help in that regard.
Well, I'll certainly do my best. I would need to know the square footage, the number of students. I'll do whatever research I can and come up with some comparisons.
Yeah, I'm not looking for a full study. I'm just like, when you frame it,
okay,
bring it to the table like that, and I think you'll get some more mileage out of that.
Thank you, Mr. Tillman.
Other final comments from board members? Okay, one last thing I just want to say. So for the board members, our homework for the next month is to go through the EAF Part 2, 1 and 2 for that matter, since they both reflect each other. And let's go through what we think, where we think we need more data to come up with a judgment about minor or no impact versus major impact. And clearly we're all going to do that. And that's where I'd like AKRF's help in the interim, as well as judging what, again, I call data sufficiency, whether you have enough input, enough data to make a judgment. That's
That
your
outline,
homework.
if I might add in, not to give extra homework, but that outline that Jan referenced too, that would be very helpful to frame areas where you might consider further study.
Yeah, I'm going to say, Dan, I think we're going to, if what Mr. Johansson wrote is in the same order as the EAF, fine, but let's use one framework, not two.
I think it is, isn't it, Jan?
Close to it, but yeah, we can go through the Part 2.
Yeah, let's use one framework, the
Okay.
Part 2. All right, thank you very much, Applicant.
Thank you.
We're going to move on.
We'll see you on April 15th.
Can't wait. Bells on, every one
All
of
right.
us. Okay.
Bye now.
Same back
Thank you.
time. Okay, so I turn the gavel over to my far more talented colleague, Kim Connor, to as I recuse myself from the Desmond Fish Library event and let her moderate this part of the conversation. Over to you, Kim.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't realize we were going to skip so quickly. Let me just.
We don't have. I'm sorry. There was no rush. There's no rush. Take as much time as you need.
Yeah. So.
I can tell a joke as an interim if you'd like.
No, it's okay. Can you hear me okay? Sometimes these speakers don't work so well. All right. So since last month's meeting, we had some comments from the public, and we found that there were some things that needed to be corrected. So I'd like to ask Steve to speak about that.
Sure. Well, Kim, it turns out that there is a section in the code. It's 175-62, and it's under special use permits. And what it says is that when a project is a major special permit, or special permit that's classified as major, or a major site plan that's been classified as major, in addition to mailing notice of the public hearing and posting notice, publishing notice in the newspaper, the applicant is required to post a sign on the property. And the sign has to state the date, place, and time of the public hearing, and it has to be up 3 days after the public hearing is scheduled. It has to be put up rather quickly. And it has to stay up throughout the public hearing. And if there is an extension, an adjournment of the public hearing, the sign has to be modified to indicate what the modified date of the public hearing is. And when the public hearing is done and before a decision is rendered, the applicant has to submit proof to the planning board that in fact the sign was posted. The Desmond Fish Library didn't have a special use aspect to it. It was just site plan, so they weren't required to do that. However, it has now been pointed out to us that there is a provision under site plan approval, 175-66F1, that incorporates by reference certain special use permit provisions, and this is one of them. So the public hearing was not properly noticed because of failure to comply with the sign posting requirement. And what the board needs to do at this time is to renotice the public hearing. That'll require publishing notice of it again. It'll require sending out the mailings again, and it will require the applicant to, within 3 days of this board approving the new public hearing, posting that sign on its property. there really is no choice. Public hearing wasn't properly noticed, and if you act, any action that you take would be subject to a legal challenge. So what the board should do at this time is, I mean, you can discuss the project further if you want. My understanding was it was ready for approval. But I would suggest just voting to reschedule the public hearing, preferably for next month. And the applicant can, you know, renotice the public hearing. You can hold it next month, take whatever additional comments come. If it's appropriate, close it and take action at that time. You're muted, Kim.
Here's my question. I have a question about the sign itself. Who provides that sign? Does the applicant make that sign up? Because the reason I ask,
well, there you go.
is because in the village clerk prepares the sign and gives it to the applicant.
Right. Our code says that they're supposed to buy it from the town clerk.
Okay.
What we've done is we've had Tara, the town clerk, prepare a paper sign that can be just filled in with checking boxes and filling in the dates. The physical sign itself, the post and the piece of wood, I don't believe the town has to sell. So, I mean, it seems to me that if the applicant's willing to just get a post and put the piece of paper on it, preferably coated in plastic so that rain and snow and whatnot doesn't destroy it, that should more than suffice. And then going forward, the town board will decide if they want to get into the sign selling business or if just pieces of paper are sufficient.
Okay. And going forward, notifying.
You're muted.
Sorry, I'm not muting myself on purpose. Going forward with these just as a board practice with, should we be notifying the applicant that they should be providing a sign? Because we've never talked about, I don't remember talking about signs since Mike Gibbons was on the board.
Yeah, we should be telling the applicant that they need to get the sign from the town clerk. That way all the signs will be uniform. There'll be no question if there's sufficient information on it or not. Again, the issue of the physical wooden or metal or whatever it is sign is something the town board needs to decide if they want to get into or not. This board can't compel the clerk to purchase them. And, you know,
Okay.
I'm not sure the town wants to do that, but,
Right.
but it's enough that the paper sign is available and the applicants can post it, again, cautioning them that it needs to be, you know, legible during the course of the, so a plastic coating of some kind would be appropriate.
So at this point, if I'd like to entertain someone to make a motion to renotice the public hearing and to have a public hearing for next month's meeting. Anybody like to make that motion? Heidi, second. All right, all in favor? Oh, I'm sorry, any discussion?
Aye.
No discussion.
No discussion, okay.
I think,
Motion
I
passes.
just
All in favor?
think, I'm sorry, Kim, I think it's F2. It's section 175, 62 F2, not section F1. That's all. Just for the record.
I stand corrected.
Very good. All right, so is there anything else we have to do about this?
No, it's scheduled for next month and we'll have a public hearing then. And like I say, hopefully everything can be wrapped up at that time.
Terrific. Thanks very much, everyone. I'm going to pass it back to Neil.
All right, Kim, thank you very much. If anyone's familiar with the concept of an Easter egg, I think I'm going to consider this sign information buried in the zoning code an Easter egg put by the sign making companies. So very interesting. I don't know who found that. Maybe Joe Regoli. That is a very impressive digging into the code. So now to the Cone property, which we visited 2 weeks ago, where Mr. Lewis got sick and Mr. Gaynor hurt his knee. So I'm hoping that that does not bode badly for the Cone family and their property going forward. First of all, we received a correspondence from Max, which I believe Jason provides, so thank you. And that states that there are no wetlands or water courses or regulated setbacks as defined by the code, which had been a question we asked of Jason, who is representing Beatty and Watson of that, which is helpful. So Ron, I know we had a site visit. We haven't received your report. If you want to give highlights, but maybe we can just talk about what we have next to do with this property.
Sure. As you described, I've tried to summarize comments that I heard based on the site visit a couple of weeks back. The board was very concerned with the issue of tree removals, project visibility and location of utility systems. That information is either showing on the site plans or subsequently provided by Beatty and Watson's office. So that's available for your review. But they do satisfy Department of Health requirements. The board at the site visit did offer no objection to the removal of trees that were identified during the site walk, and that since has been accomplished. So it's now a matter for the board to make a decision whether you wish to have a public hearing on the matter, but move it towards potential action with resolutions for the next meeting.
All right, thank
It is
you.
the public hearing is discretionary since it's deemed a minor site plan project.
Thank you. Steve, you want to add anything?
But normally, the public hearings are held. I think this is in the Scenic Protection Overlay District. So, I mean, this is particularly the type of thing that, you might want to have public input on before you render a decision.
Thank you. Does anyone, before we get into that topic, which is a good one, does anyone have any comments they want to make that amplifies anything Ron wrote or from the site visit? There was a lot of discussion happening there. So if anyone wants to add any comments at this point? Okay. And you have Ron's note, please. So I'd love, just I'll start with Dennis, who's closest to my face on the Zoom, if he has any viewpoint about having a public hearing.
Well, I think we've been having public hearings for almost every project, it seems. And with the scenic overlay, excuse me, I think we probably should.
Okay, that's helpful.
Get comments from the neighbors.
Anyone have a different viewpoint of Dennis's that like to share, or simple amplification? Any different views from Dennis's? Heidi, go ahead, please.
Well, I think we should have a public hearing because a lot of neighbors showed up, and there was more attendance than our usual site visit, other than obviously the Shakespeare site. So it seems like it makes sense to give people a chance to say things.
Very thoughtful indeed. Other thoughts to add to Dennis and Heidi's comments? No. All right. Let me have a motion then to schedule. I tend to agree with Dennis and Heidi as well. So I'd like a motion to schedule a public hearing for our next meeting, please.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Peter. Second, Neil Tillman, it looks like. Any discussion? Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstentions. Okay, motion passes. So we're going to have a public hearing. So Cheryl, if you go along with the process of noticing it, please. Now,
Sure.
Dare I ask Steve, because I was recused and not paying fully as attention as I could have and should have in the last piece, because I was just a member of the public during the library event. Are there any other noticing requirements that we have not been attending to that we have to do? Paper sign et al.
The special use permit provision applies only to major special use permits. Major projects require special use permits, and major projects require site plan. This isn't major project, so it wouldn't.
And the scenic overlay, I'm going to be sensitive to this topic for the near future.
Nothing to do with it.
Fine. Okay. So Cheryl, please go ahead and notice it properly. I don't know if Jason, you want to add anything at this point, but I think that's our next step.
Right. I don't know if we're doing this anymore, but is it possible that Ron could have a resolution prepared for the public hearing in case it's,
Oh God, Jason, you have learned well from Glenn Watson. You sneaky guy, you. Well done. Well, Glenn, give that guy a raise. Well done. Mark, give him a bonus. I don't know. I think we got to get the public input.
Okay.
And I feel like that's a little premature on that one. If it was one more meeting forward, I would applaud you and say, hey, sure, or at least ask but I think it's a little unless anyone feels differently.
I just want to give it to him just for chutzpah. I mean, just for Jason, good man.
All right.
You're, as they say about good lawyers, you're a vigorous advocate. So well done.
Okay, good enough.
All right. But anything else on the project? Thank you for your running around the woods last week.
I believe the trees were removed immediately in conjunction with the building department, were removed and So that work was in fact done before the April 1st deadline for the tree cutting. So thank you for that, allowing us to do that. So thank you.
Okay, unless anyone else, board members, any other comments or questions? Okay, so we'll see you next month for the duly noticed public hearing, no sign required, apparently.
Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cohen. Take care. All right, we'll move on to old new business or new old business, Magazzino. Glenn, if you, I don't know if you're doing it there. Glenn's back. So you may have gotten your package. So let's turn to Glenn to just give us an update on what's going on.
Well, all I have to say is, now that Jason has learned well enough, I may have to retire. So, as you know, we had, you hearing me, right?
Yes, sir. You're good. Keep going, Glenn.
As we had an issue where we had a subdivision approved by you during the course of completing the conditions of approval. The seller of the piece of property that was going to, Mr. Fadden, who was going to sell a portion of his property to Magazzino, pulled out of the deal. We pulled out the subdivision. We withdrew the subdivision application, actually gave you notice that we weren't going to complete it because we couldn't complete we couldn't complete the purchase. And so then we had the dilemma of part of our site plan was on the larger piece with the additional 5 acres, and we didn't have it to complete the site plan requirements. We also have a conditional approval on that. So we've modified the site plan and are asking you to modify your resolution. If I can take the screen for just a minute, I'll show you the difference.
Go ahead.
So you see 2 maps? Maybe? Yeah, okay.
Yes, sir.
On the right side is the subdivision that the site plan you approved. It included a 5-acre piece that you had approved us to be able to purchase, and that's what fell apart. And so this 5-acre piece that I'm outlining with my cursor is no longer available to Magazzino. Of course, we had the single-family dwelling up in the upper northeast corner of the piece and a lot for that. So that's out of the picture. So Magazzino is left with their current holdings, which follows this red line, this red line, and then all the property south of that red line. So we obviously cannot fulfill the conditions of your site plan approval because we don't have the area and we don't have the approved place for the residential single-family residential structure. So we've modified the site plan so that our north line is the current property line, and we've removed the single-family dwelling from the site plan and are asking you to modify the resolution that previously granted approvals so that we can build the rest of the project. It's essentially the same. The driveways are exactly the same. The proposed building is exactly the same. The parking's the same. The only thing that has changed is we've been to the health department. We're in the process of getting a septic approval. That has been, I won't say it's basically the same. It's been modified slightly to accommodate the needs. And we do have, this is unusual, but the health department, because it's public water supply, it's a non-public, I'm sorry, the term is escaping me. It's a water supply that the public gets access to. It's privately owned, but the public has access to. So we have a special set of rules. Health department would not entertain our septic system permit until we drill the well in this lower portion of the property where the cursor is now. And that well has been drilled. It was just tested. The test material is at the lab, and we hope to have that back. So we're, again, just to repeat myself, and then I'll give up the screen. We're asking you to amend the resolution and re-adopt it so that we can move forward with the project. These other tables and stuff have been, just to say that they have been modified as well to accommodate the new areas and coverage requirements, and all of that is still good.
Thank you, Glenn. Let me just go right to Steve. Steve, can we do what Glenn is asking?
Was the site plan signed and filed with the town clerk?
No.
Yes, you can do what he's asking. It's the same thing as a modification to a site plan pre-approval. The only question that the board has to ask itself is, one, are you willing to do it? And two, do you feel that the change is significant enough that a second public hearing would be required? But that aside, there's no need for a new application, and you can certainly adopt a resolution approving the modified site plan.
Ron, do you want to get in here? Anything to add?
No, you've received a short memorandum from my office just to refresh the board's memory on what the original project was. As described by the applicant, it's merely an issue where they've lost the additional 5-acre piece. The improvements originally proposed all still remain, with the exception of the scholars' residence, and everything's in the same location as previous. And I had merely asked Steve to comment on whether the board could immediately act to approve an amendment to that resolution, or whether any steps had to be repeated. But Steve indicates it's ready for your action if you're so disposed.
Are board members' questions at this stage?
Just to be clear, it's ready for your action to the extent that Ron can prepare another resolution and you can adopt it.
Right.
You can't just by voice vote say, hey, presto, he's got his approval.
Yeah, no, I understood. Board members' questions about whether we're comfortable. I think we'd have to direct Ron to prepare those for the next meeting, and then we'd vote on it next time. But questions about that as a procedure or opinions?
Question for Glenn. Do you think that they'll want to purpose some other part of the property, the scholar and residence in the?
Well, they originally had a site in the northeast corner of this original parcel. I can't tell you no, but there's been no discussion of it, and I was directed to take it off. But it's possible, and it would fit. But right now, I have no direction to do that.
Because there was a building there. And did we in the past approve something to replace that, or is it too long since that building was taken down? Or
the original site plan approval, if you recall, the property line, this parcel has gotten bigger. They bought the piece to the south. The original parcel well, I'm not sharing. I'm pointing at the thing. I'm thinking you're seeing it. The south third, I'll say, of the property that you saw was not a part of the original approval. That was added. The original approval did have a second building, a single-family residential building in the northeast corner, and it all fit on the original parcel. The house that was there was going to be taken down, and it has since been taken down, but it was going to be replaced by a single-family dwelling. But right now, they've just given up on that idea, at least for the present, and frankly, because they want to get going on this building. And
right, so they couldn't, that prior approval, they couldn't come back to us and say, already approved this building. that if they wanted to put up a building, they would have to come back to us and ask for permission.
Yeah, I never thought of that. Kim, that's a good idea. I might try it. No, that's long since expired.
Okay, good. That's all I wanted. That's just all I wanted to know. Thanks.
All right, Heidi, go ahead.
I seem to recall that in the northwestern part of the property of the site, there was a wetlands buffer. I mean, currently now the northwestern part of the property, based on the map, I think you just showed, Glenn, is not going to be yours at all. It's somebody else's, right? I'm sort of confused about what's happened with the wetlands buffer.
Okay, let me go back to share my screen, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Nuts. Put them both down. On the right side, these are different, slightly different scales. I apologize for that. On the right side is what you approved with that straight line along the top, and the wetlands buffer line is this green line, comes into the property. So what's happened is it's gotten cut off. As you can see, this part up in the I'm on the right drawing. That's no longer part of the property, but the buffer continues through the present property and is still a significant portion of the buffer on our property in the northwest corner.
Okay.
Okay.
But there's a lot less open space up there, I guess. I
Well,
just know.
There's a fairly big wetland on that piece of property, and and there's a pond on that piece of property right in here, right over on the right side of the screen. That's a pond that the buffer surrounds 100 feet from the pond. So yes, there is wetland in there, and frankly, I don't know exactly why Mr. Fadden changed his mind, or and he has since sold the property to someone else. But Magazzino was buying wetlands simply for protection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions? I have a brief one then, which is, so the only reason why I would feel the need for more investigation is there any way, Steve or Ron, that if a different building was put on the adjacent property that was sold, where they were going to put this housing or whatever it was called, the professor's housing, whatever you guys were calling it, would there be anything that the neighbor could do that would then change our considerations of approval?
Yeah, I can't imagine the reduction in area of the parcel being reduced to its original current size. The board could see any issue with the proposal being exactly the same as it was, minus that proposed property purchase.
Okay, well then let me ask this. Can I get a motion, please, to direct Ron to prepare the revised plans for our approval in the next meeting?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Kim. Can I have a second? Looks like Neil gave me a second. Okay, any discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, opposed, abstention. So Ron, you have your direction. Glenn will approve it formally at the next board meeting.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Glenn. All right, lastly, Waldrick. I don't know, Glenn, are you representing them?
No.
Okay. Well then, Glenn, have a good night, my friend. Thank
Good night.
you. Good night, Jason. Thank you. Mr. Hartford, are you representing the Waldrick? I see there's a Waldrick here as well.
Yes, Jenna, and I think maybe Jesse might be joining us as well.
All right, James, you are the only thing keeping us from our 2.5-hour end of this long night. So don't take that to rush.
All this on me.
Yes, a big burden. And Miss do you go by, is it Wildrick or Wild Rick? How do I pronounce their name?
I have to ask my husband. He's on his way down. I'm Jenna. Hello, but it's Wildrick.
Okay, you're new to the last name, it sounds like. Okay.
No, I mean,
Wildrick.
I'm half joking, but we always say when people ask how to spell it, we say like Wild Rick. He's asking how to pronounce Wildrick or Wild Rick.
Oh.
Yeah, we like either, but Wildrick is correct.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it to be a complicated question.
And I'm sorry to have a
apologize.
complicated answer. It's
Yes,
kind of
no,
late.
no problem. All right, so Mr. and Mrs. Wildrick. Now I forgot what the hell it was.
Wildrick, you're doing great.
Wildrick, yes, Wildrick. Got it. Go ahead and talk about your project, please.
Okay, should we take it away, or James, do you want to talk about it?
You decide. We just need to we usually do the introduction to the project. Okay. Ron will then say some comments, who's our engineer. Steve will add. We'll ask some questions, and then we'll talk about the process.
You can give a quick overview, and then James can get into more of the details. Basically, we bought here in Garrison 2 properties, parcel 28 and 30 on Hudson River Lane. It's right on the water, so there's a lot of things that go with that. We are learning, and we moved up here full-time post-pandemic. We had a baby, and it made sense to have more space. We were living in Manhattan. And so now that we're thinking about being here more, we're realizing we need a little bit more space, and we want to combine the properties to be able to have one home that sort of straddles the area. And that's basically the gist of it. So we're excited to be here, and this is all new for us, and we have a lot to learn, but James has been wonderful, and we're feeling hopeful and excited.
Great. So Jenna and Jesse had brought me on to help them design a single home on the combined lot, and the 2 existing lots each have a 2-bedroom house. Both have been impacted by flooding. One is pretty much uninhabitable right now, and the other one is barely above sea level. So the idea is that we would address the 500-year floodplain issue, as well as also design a passive house, so ideally net zero house that would replace those 2 structures as one. Basically, essentially combining the 2 lots to one, and essentially combining the 2 existing houses to one, so that essentially we're taking the same footprint and bridging over a boat ramp that's central to the new combined lot. It's like there's actually a natural, tiny little bit of natural shoreline essentially that straddles the 2 lots that we would retain. So the house would be covering the same footprints of the 2, bridging over so that we maintain that natural flow. And it would be essentially a very low to zero impact home. We would replace the septic systems, which are currently, basically indeterminate, with a new peat system that would be properly sized for this and would be engineered so that it would meet the Putnam County Health Department's requirements. And we're also replacing a seawall on the number 28 side of the property, the north side. That is a gabion wall basket system that's in pretty poor shape and is deteriorating. So that would be, an improvement. Currently, our calculations are essentially that we would have a total increase of impervious material on the site, surfaces on the site of 0.4%, and that's essentially attributed to replacing that gabion basket wall, which is porous, with a gravity precast concrete wall, which would be consistent with the number 30 seawall. So it's essentially a wash in terms of absorption impact on the site, but a lot of other improvements, elimination of 2 oil burner heating systems, including the oil tanks, elimination of propane fired cooktops and generators, and going all electric, and essentially net zero.
Thank you. I know, Ron, there's a lot going on here in your memos. So, and I think this is our first, at least in my last decade, that's down by the water area down there. So could you start on the list of stuff? Because there seems like a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I first wonder for James, is it possible for you to post a site plan so the board can better appreciate all that you just described verbally in terms of the project components?
Yes, that would be great.
That might be helpful.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so right there is our zoning conformance chart. You can see right down here our increased lot coverage is 0.4%. And you know, that's just a lot of kind of calculus there. But to scroll up to the site, this is the a current site. Well, it's actually a little bit outdated, but it's essentially the site survey that shows the property. It includes, you know, essentially the entirety of Hudson River Lane in front of their two properties, and it includes a significant portion of land under the Hudson. Notice these truncation lines here. This is not to scale. Essentially, it's double the distance out into the Hudson that is actually their property. This is these red lines actually show the extent of their property to scale, and you know, so we're working on replacing this current gabion basket wall with something that's more durable. This is definitely showing some wear and tear from erosion, and we're collecting bids from engineers and contractors to do that replacement. You can see the hard edge wall of the concrete gravity wall here. It would be essentially cast off-site and brought in and placed by equipment so that we're not pouring concrete within the confines of the river. And then here's that boat launch here that has, you know, creates essentially a natural beach area that we would actually maintain and perhaps even enhance. Sorry, these are at different scales here. Got one more here. There it is. So so in this overlay, this kind of gray hatched area is the existing deck and the existing house right here, and here on number 30, and here is the existing deck and then the existing house here at number 28. So our plan in the dark blue here is to retain the same side yard setbacks of both houses here, and basically create a structure that is essentially the same footprint as number 28 there, and essentially the same footprint of number 30 here, which there's a current garage here. We would essentially extend out to that. We're going to eliminate this garage here, so that goes away. So essentially we're doing the math to balance this out, pulling this portion of the house further away from the river and eliminating the deck here. So things get pulled further back. And then this dashed line and hatched area is the second story kind of bridge over that first story area. So we're giving a little bit more room to the river's edge here. This blue dashed line is the proposed new seawall, kind of opening this up a little bit more so it's a little bit more of a, kind of a forgiving edge for the natural environment here. And we are proposing a swimming pool here, which right now we're collecting bids from biophilic, natural, organic pool systems for this. And just a little bit more, so the peat packaged septic system will be essentially about this size and would be located about here on the site. And there's kind of a gravel blacktop mix here that we would restore to grass. The existing septic is about up here. We would use that actually for reverse osmosis water system, so that the water in the well is compromised by river water. So we would use reverse osmosis and then discharge the effluent water, which is not really, effluent in the way we typically think of it, but it's not drinking water. So that would be released back into this existing septic system rather than just released back into the environment first. How's that?
All right, thank you. Sorry, you get an 18-year-old to call you about math from college. You're like, thank God they called. Like, God bless. The Wildricks, maybe, hopefully you're earlier than I am in my parenting. So, okay, there's a lot there you gave us, James. There's a lot going on. Ron, I think we got the gist of this thing. There's a lot going on. So, you want to give us the cliff notes, because I think we've all read the memo. At least I hope we have.
Okay, as indicated, there's two existing properties. Both structures are going to be demolished. One new structure straddling the property lines. Obviously, it's dependent requirement to merge the parcels first. Because of the enlargement of a non-conforming building, they're going to have to get the involvement of the Zoning Board of Appeals, because they're proposing an enlargement, I believe, larger than what's permitted by your non-conforming use ordinance. They're permitted to expand up to 25% of floor area. I believe they're a fair bit beyond that. So Zoning Board is going to be involved. One, to grant the variances that are necessary, and two, just to grant a special permit that becomes necessary because of the size of the enlargement. So just in summary, there's multiple town boards involved. It's obviously the Zoning Board of Appeals. It's the Planning Board for site plan approval, given the size of the structure. Town Conservation Board is going to be involved just to grant a wetlands watercourse permit for the work along the Hudson River. DEC is involved in the repair permit for the bulkhead repairs, separate from this board, but Army Corps of Engineers will likewise be involved in that work in the river. Putnam County Department of Health is going to be involved for the sanitary disposal systems that are being proposed. So again, this is the very first time you've seen this project, first time it's been presented. Typically what the board does is initially classify the project. Because it's a residential project, it's been town policy to always treat those as minor projects. And so tonight you should initially classify the project as a minor project, just to satisfy the procedural requirement. Secondarily, you'll want to decide if you need to have a site inspection for the property, just to understand whether there's any environmental impacts or neighbor issues that you want to consider in your processing of your portion of the application before you. Since there are other agencies involved relative to seeker, again, it would represent an unlisted action. And normally residential projects, you're not too concerned in terms of whether a coordinated review is accomplished, but in this case, with multiple town boards involved, I'd suggest you make a coordinated seeker review and declare your intent to become lead agency. That's a matter I think you can do tonight if you're prepared to do so. That'll accomplish various referrals to those other town agencies, make them aware of the project, and give them an opportunity to provide initial comments to you. Lastly, just because it's on the river, there's a statutory requirement to make referral to Putnam County Department of Health. I've identified in my review various other technical things that I will work out with the applicant's representatives, but those are the majority of issues that you should be moving on tonight. Classifying the project as a minor project, one, classifying it as an unlisted action pursuant to seeker, and then making a determination whether you want to have a coordinated environmental review, which I would recommend.
So, Ron, Steve, go ahead.
Ron, since it's residential, since it's a single family home, isn't it a type 2 action?
Oh, that's true. I was thinking of all the permitting involved, but you know, you could
No,
be
there's a
right.
lot of
That's right.
permitting. I hear you. I can see where that might be, but I still think it's a type 2 action.
Okay, thank you. Very good.
Question, are we at the point where all single family homes are type 2?
For everything, maybe because it's a use, it isn't really a use. Is it a use variance, Ron? I guess it would be.
They need variances for setbacks.
Any area
And-
variances or
and they
special
haven't- they-
permits. I'm
They
sorry.
need, they need a special permit for the enlargement of the structures.
All
over what
right,
presently exists.
I guess then, yeah, if it's an area variance, it's clearly a type 2. But a special permit or a use variance, I think would be an unlisted action. The only other thing I'd say is I disagree with Ron on I understand where he's coming from, don't get me wrong, but on the idea of a coordinated review, if you have a coordinated review, just as we discussed under the Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival, no other board can take action until you complete secret review. And when you need variances before you can determine if you're going to go forward with a project, you really want to give the zoning board a free hand to decide that. Otherwise, they have to hold off until you go through complete review of the project. And if they don't grant those variances, the applicant can't go forward with the project or may change it substantially. So really, this is one of those odd situations where I understand where Ron's coming from, but this particular one where you got to have variances before you go with the other approvals, I think you're better off with an uncoordinated review. Otherwise, you put the applicant in a really bad position. So I guess at the end of the day, I agree with Ron. It is an unlisted action. I see where he's coming from on that. And I understand his position on coordinated review, but I disagree with it. I think you should do an uncoordinated review.
So a couple of related questions. A minor project is a term of art, but this is clearly a significant number of activities going on. Does the activities and number of variances needed impact minor versus major?
Since the change in zoning in 2011, the whole concept of classifying a project as major or minor came into being. From the very beginning of the adoption of that ordinance, it's been the policy of the town, which I've been informed by multiple building inspectors, that residential projects were always intended to be considered minor. And so that's the policy that's been followed.
Okay.
Even when they're buried knee deep with the Section 404 Clean Water Act. I mean, I sort of agree. That sort of sounds like it complicates it, Ron, no?
Well, I would agree, but it's not been town policy. I can only go by the precedent that's been set before.
And then second question, do you concur with that, Steve?
Yeah, Ron's right. That's been our policy. If it's residential, it's been treated as minor. I mean,
a second question, and I feel like we've played this sometimes. There seems like so many things that the zoning board has to opine upon that would materially impact our viewpoint of the project and the site plan. Is there no reason why we should let the zoning board take their first crack at this and then come back to us? I know, again, we play this game a lot. We just did it with Flag, where they wanted us to opine while they were opining, but I almost feel like you got to get a variance before we can even decide, because what is it, 5,600 square feet starting from a position of being 1,800 square feet with all these other things. I get a little nervous about us having a viewpoint. And I get your point, Steve, about doing two things in parallel, but boy, our perspective would change if they came back and said, the zoning board came back and said, no way, or we need something, this and that. So I see Kim nodding her head. And I'm not trying to kick the can or pass the buck, but I get a little nervous about this one, given your write-up, Ron.
No, I completely agree with you. I don't think it's appropriate for us to do anything until, we get an answer from the ZBA as to whether or not, the nonconformities are acceptable. Like, one of my questions about this property is, when we calculate how much land there is and how much of it the house covers, does that include the land that's underwater?
Keep in mind that our calculations are basically apples to the existing structures, right?
Well, no, they're larger. you know, what you've got is two non-conforming structures because the current zoning for the town, I believe, is 5 acres. These are all very small lots. This house is larger than the two houses that you're removing. So I would actually like to know how much, you know, is the land that's underwater counted as part of the calculation?
It is, you know, it is part of the area calculation, but the math for determining the size of the house is relative to the existing houses. You know,
Right, it's already over the 25 that's permitted. Right, I just think this is something ZBA needs to let us know.
25% enlargement.
This is not like it's plus or minus 5%. I think it's 1,900 square feet of the two houses, and you're asking for 5,600 square feet. That's 3x.
No.
So
I need some help in finding that location.
I'm just doing some rough math here. I'm just saying, like, if you're asking for a 5,600 square foot house on a really small, wet piece of land, and I'm not trying to criticize in any way, it feels like we need the zoning board to weigh in. That's sentiment of at least two board members. I don't know how other board members feel at this point. I'll turn it over to.
The combined lot is 6,033 square feet. So
I know, but sir, but the analysis is you take the two existing buildings, the envelope, you say you can have up to 25% over those two building footprints, and we're saying it's whatever it is, I think it was 800 plus 9 or so 1,700, and 1,700 times 3 is 5,100, and so we're up to, that's even more than 3x. So. And that's 300%. So I don't. Other board members and the viewpoint of the ZBA that Kim raised. Dennis, go ahead.
I think it should go zoning.
Peter?
Is there some, this is down in Manitou, right?
Yes.
And so is there a Manitou association or anything like that? I mean, and what was the story about that building they were, that never got finished up at the north end of the, that little piece of property there? But do we have to get in touch with those people too, if they exist? I don't know if they do.
Don't know how to answer that one, Ron or Steve.
No, I have no knowledge.
Other board members' thoughts?
See, James, you're counting the area underneath the water. I've had some experience with this mean high water mark. Isn't that the end of the jurisdiction? Isn't that is the mean high water mark for waterfront construction, your property ends at the mean high water mark, no?
Their lot
Or mean high tide or whatever, I'm sorry.
Their deed includes 200 feet of water essentially beyond the seawall.
So Ron or Steve, any other comments on this notion, Heidi or Laura, on zoning board sequencing?
Sure sounds to me like it should go to the zoning board first. I agree. That makes a lot of sense to me. I can only agree with what Kim said.
Yeah, I agree with Kim as well.
So Ron or Steve, are you okay procedurally with us? And again, I'm sorry to the Wildricks. This is a lot here, and there's welcome to Garrison. I hope this is not. I hope this is the easiest of the projects you do in real estate in your careers together. So Ron or Steve, any opposition to our suggestion to pass this very big buck over to the zoning board?
I don't have any problem with that. I do agree with Ron, though, that you could do a few things at this point. Declare it unlisted, declare it minor. I think a referral to the CB would be in order, as well as a referral to the zoning board. The zoning board may want to hear from the CB on this more than it might want to hear from you.
We're in front of the CB.
I think I would go forward with that. I think that's about as far as I would go at this point.
Minor, unlisted, and referral to not only the ZBA, but the conservation.
Right, and I would determine to do an uncoordinated secret review, but I would not move forward with anything until you
Yeah, I think I'm happy to state that at this point, but I mean, well, let me ask you this: what happens if the ZBA wants to do the coordinated secret review? And so
That's their right if they want to, but I really don't think that they will. The reason that they wouldn't is because although they'll certainly look at all environmental impacts, understanding that it's an uncoordinated review, they know that when it comes back to the planning board, you'll take a more in-depth look at the environmental impacts. And they really aren't set up for an in-depth look. They don't have consultants like you do and so forth. I'd be very, very surprised if they did anything like that.
Okay, thank you. Ron, concur?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so I'd like a motion to classify the Willardrix project as a minor project, please. Thank you, Kim. For anyone second? Neil, thank you. Discussion, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, abstentions. Okay, I'd like to declare the motion to declare this an unlisted action for SECRA. Okay, Peter first, Neil second. Discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstentions. I will declare this an uncoordinated review for SECRA purposes. Can I have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Neil. Kim, second by Laura. Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I wish we could do this as a package. I know this seems very, very almost pedantic the way I'm doing this, but there's not much to discuss, it seems like. Okay, that motion passes. And then finally, I guess we need a motion to refer this to the ZBA and the conservation boards. I'm gonna do that together. Steve, if you'll indulge me. Can I have a motion to that effect? Peter, thank you. Kim, second. Any discussion? And I guess the only thing I'd say is that the referral to ZBA is for their action as opposed to their just awareness of this. And Ron, you can frame that however the language is appropriate to frame. Can I have a motion? Can I have a, I have a movement and a second. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, abstentions. Okay, Jenna and Jesse, best of luck to you. I'm sorry this is not a easy project, but I'm sure you knew that going into it, and we look forward to how beautiful it one day will be.
Thank
So,
you.
Thanks for your time, everyone.
Thank you
all
for
right,
staying
thank
so
you.
late.
All right, good evening all. I have a motion to adjourn. Any last comments?
You have.
You were not, is it doing a site visit just too premature at this point to, for this?
I think we've basically said, let the ZBA handle it.
Okay.
Of course, you can, as the weather is churned, you can always go visit the water and see the beautiful view. Maybe get on the train and go to Grand Central. All right, any other comments though? Okay, thank you very much. Motion to adjourn, please. Neil? Dennis? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, no one will oppose that. Good evening, all. Cheryl, thank you very much. See you
night,
next
everyone.
month.
Good night, everyone.
Everybody.
Bye.